Recording in progress. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us to our Freedom Thinking for the Love of Life retreat. We're trying to figure it out, whether it was 3 or 4.
Or 5.
Or 5. We actually haven't got a clue.
I think we started in May 2020 in the online.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. People come and go on these things. It's a 3-day event that we're going to be doing, and hopefully it will be full of growth and learning for everybody, including Jenny and myself. We've got 3 fantastic speakers coming up over the next 3 days, friends of ours who we like to drag in and get involved. Just bear with me. I'm just going to see whose mic's on. It's always Kelly. We'll forgive her. Yeah, so we've got 3 fantastic speakers. So this evening we've got Dick and Bettinger, Dr. Dick and Bettinger tonight, and that is from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. I'm hoping that everybody has seen the itinerary. If you have, you are very, very organised and well done. And if you haven't, you're like me. So that's cool. We just thought we would start, if you don't mind, should we start it? Just want to read you our mission statement so you get there are people on this call today who know us, and there are people on this call I can see who are brand new to us. So I just want people to get a sense of Jen and I and where we're coming from and what freedom thinking is all about. So I just want to read you our mission statement. Our vision, this is on our website, which is freedomthinking.co.uk. We see a world united in understanding and common humanity, where every individual realizes their own connection, innate resilience, creativity, and potential to create a life in which they can thrive and flourish. We see a world where all people are understood, appreciated, valued, and included in the creation of a viable existence for every living being. And the well-being of the whole takes the sustainable precedence. That's what freedom thinking is about. That's what Jen and I are about. So hopefully over this next 3 days, we can help to create more of that in the world, and all of us together can help to create more of that in the world. This is very much a collaborative event. There are times for questions and sharing of information, sharing of knowledge, things that we've realized, and sharing of insights. So there's time for that this afternoon. And to begin with, we have got on the itinerary. So we're going to go into about 11:15, and we're going to try and stay to these times as best we can. Sometimes we lose track of time. And sometimes things do, we are quite flexible in the times, but we're going to try and stick to them as best we can. But to begin with, we just want to introduce ourselves, what this is about, and a little bit about the 3 principles in case there's people who are new to the 3 principles. I'm Dave Ellery, by the way.
And I'm newly Jenny Ellery. And I keep wondering how it's Ellery, haven't got it yet.
Nobody knows.
Haven't got my new signature yet. That's the first time we've done an event where I've introduced myself like that.
It's our first married retreat, isn't it?
Second. Well, first virtual.
Yeah.
It's funny because I recognise so many faces, but then there are new people. So we have said we're going to introduce ourselves, but keep it a bit briefer than we usually do. So I came across the 3 principles understanding back in 2005 when Dr. Roger Mills came over to the UK to run a train the trainer program. And he also ran core courses, what he called them back then. And my sister had met a whole new group of people when I'd been away traveling, and she was going on and on about the three principles. And she couldn't explain to me what it was about. And then so she introduced me to her new friends, and they were trying to explain to me what it was about. And it made absolutely no sense. But she invited me to London with her for 3 days to learn more about it from Dr. Roger Mills. And then when we arrived, there's a lady called Margaret Opio who was there sharing with him. And it was funny, on the first day, I missed the whole morning because they'd made us go around the room and introduce ourselves. And I was so shy that took my anxiety levels up so high that I couldn't hear. I was just like sweating and red, and it was unbearable for me. And in the afternoon, we got to watch some videos of the three principles being shared in the prison systems out in America. And there was something in those videos that woke something up in me. And over the next few days, it was like a quietness descended in my mind. And I just got really present and listened. And looking back now, I started to realize that all of the struggles that I'd experienced as a teenager and young person, with eating disorders, shyness, anxiety, bouts of depression. I'd spent a lot of time with psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists and homeopathy and kinesiology, all these things trying to help me feel better. And I'd come to believe that there was something wrong with me. And I think over those 3 days, that idea just fell away. And I realized there was nothing wrong with me. There was nothing to fix. And that in itself took the biggest weight off my mind. Because I think from a very young age, I thought there was something a bit different about me, and there's something a bit not quite right. And then as a teenager, that got really big in my mind. And it's like that being removed, the weight of that thought that I carried being removed, kind of gave me a lightness and an opportunity to start seeing life differently. And when my mind had cleared, what then started to come to me was insight about not only my nature, but the nature of life, the nature of being, the nature of human beings, the nature of what it is to be here. And I went home after those 3 days, and I think my mum and dad just said, we thought you'd joined a cult or you're taking drugs, because they didn't believe that someone could change quickly. And then I think for them, seeing the sustained change in me over the next 8 or 9 months got both of them interested. And my dad now shares this and has been on umpteen courses and done fantastic work in schools and with children. But I think for them to see someone who in their mind was a fixed, shy person with anxiety suddenly become buoyant and enjoy life and it be sustained was incredible. And then I think I knew that whatever happened, I wanted to share this with other people, because it felt like, and I think Jack Pransky's written a book, Somebody Should Have Told Us. That was how I felt. I was like, why did no one tell me this before? Why didn't anyone ever explain to me about the mind? Why isn't this in every single school? So over the last, coming up 17 years, I've had the privilege of traveling the world and creating Three Principles movies with Rudy, interviewing people within the prison system, the schooling system, within business, then going out to Nepal with yourself and Rude, and getting to see people's incredible resilience and nature after the earthquake in 2015. And then together we've done a lot of work out in South Africa and worked within township communities. And it's just been incredible to see that there is something that we can learn about in life that's so simple, so overlooked, but so simple that it applies to all. And I don't think we've been anywhere in the world where we haven't seen people, as they learn about this, transform and wake up. And
in spite of language barriers and
all kinds of things, hasn't it, Ben? But it's been, I often say it's almost been my education. The three principles has been, I was 23 when I came across it, and I was quite a young 23. So this understanding has been what I've grown up with now. And I'm so grateful, because I was kind of headed in a direction of self-destruct and self-pity in lots of ways. I felt really sorry for myself. And it was interesting because one of the insights I had being out in South Africa was some of the stories we got to hear about people's lives and what they'd been through were just unbelievable. You can't believe what human beings can do to human beings. But I also saw that suffering is a state of mind, and it doesn't matter where you're from, what you've been through, the state of mind in which you're in will be what's creating the suffering that you experience. So I kind of initially felt like, God, who am I to have said I've struggled in my life? Who am I to say that I've suffered? When I'm listening to these stories of just some of the most horrendous things that people had been through. But everybody in that group, it was a group of refugees who were being looked after by an amazing man in South Africa called Godel Safu at Redeeming Hope for the Disabled.
Fantastic charity.
Every single person showed us such love and respect and kindness, and they listened. And they didn't have that judgment of, why on earth are you saying that you've struggled when you've come from a country that isn't at war? You've got loving families, you've got food, you've got shelter, you've got all those things. They just showed us respect and love. And what I love about the understanding, however simple it is, over the years, it just deepens and expands you and keeps on bringing.
And humbles.
Yeah, it brings you to your knees. What I realised on a much deeper level through meeting Dave was these principles don't only apply to human beings. These principles are universal, as Sydney Banks called them, universal principles. They apply not only to us, they apply to the plants, to the animals, to the whole thing. This one life, this one experience, this one everything. The principles is underpinning it, creating it. And the principles, we'll go into a bit more depth of those in a moment, but they are a description of something that really can't be put into words. So I couldn't even remember what the three principles were after I had my first 3 days with Dr. Roger Mills and Margaret, but the change and shift that happened in me was huge. So you don't have to listen to the words, you don't have to take notes, you don't have to take our word for anything, you don't have to believe us. It seems that this message is shared almost beyond the words to the space within me that's the same with the space within you. And I think that's how this changes. So it isn't an intellectual thing. But maybe if you do you want to introduce yourself a bit before we go into the principles?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, before we do that, I meant to say this at the beginning. We do these retreats via donation. And that means people, if they wish to, make a donation to Freedom Thinking and help Jenny and I continue with our work. And that donation is whatever anybody feels comfortable with, what they feel the value of it is. But we are aware that these are quite difficult times for a lot of people. And so what we ask, if people are not in a position to make a donation, we ask that they pay it forward with an act of kindness. And this act of kindness we ask that it be above and beyond. Like, yeah, we could give a homeless person £5. There we go, paid it forward. We ask it be a really connecting thing where the individual perhaps makes the homeless person a meal or something like that. Whatever, use our imagination, but we ask that people pay it forward. They can't afford to make a donation. Pay it forward with an act of kindness, and really think about it. And because these acts of kindness change the world, and that's what we would like to. That's how we want to see this. We want to see this as being something that takes the world in a positive direction. So, yeah, my name's Dave Elleray. I came across the principles in 2013 after a big breakdown, massive depression, feeling suicidal, breakdown of my marriage. I thought I've spent time in prison when I was younger. I thought I was well and truly back on my way to prison. I went to prison for violence. I thought the next time I went back to prison, it would be for murder. Anybody who knew me back in that time, I could see one person on the screen who did, my mum. Would know I was an exceptionally angry man. I was a really unhappy man. I had everything in the world lined up for me that I needed. I had a beautiful wife, my own home, my own business, which was doing well. A couple of cars. I had money, although I didn't think I did. I had friends. I've got an amazing family. But as happens in life, there is this. We pin all our hopes and dreams on external events and external things, objects and stuff. And at some point we run into the fact that that does not neither bring us peace nor happiness. And when we run into that fact, we experience it as suffering. So my suffering was deep, it was hard, I was seeing therapists, I was medicated, I was seeing psychologists, doctors, every other day, every day sometimes, not going to work. My physical body took a right battering. My heart was doing bizarre things. I aged very, very quickly. My face looked old. I was drinking a lot. And I ended up, the only thing I was living for at the time was a fell running. I used to do a lot of fell running, mountain running. I'm from the Lake District. So I used to do a lot of mountain running. I was living for a fell running holiday weekend with the lads up in Torridon. And if anybody knows Torridon, beautiful place, West Coast Scotland, Northwest Coast Scotland, just magic. Me being me, we got back from a run, went to a pub, got into a bit of a scrap with a local fella. It was for my kind of first, I don't know, I look back at that time. I was very drunk, but I remember sitting next to this little fella and he looked at me and he said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, I'm a tree surgeon. And he said, "You look like an effing hairdresser to me." And then he looked at me, and I remember this being a really bizarre moment. He looked at me and said, "Your family, though, they haven't been there for you." When I broke up my wife, my family took it very hard and they felt like they'd split loyalties. So they rallied around Rach and I felt like I was pushed out. And this man said to me, "Your family haven't been there for you, have they?" And I said, "What do you mean? Why are you saying that?" He said, "You know fine well why I'm saying that. This is a man who didn't know me from Adam." He said, "Your family haven't been there for you." And he started laughing. And I, being me back in that day, very angry, quick to temper, I said, "I suggest you shut the F up." And he started laughing and just said, "Your family haven't been there for you." And laughed and laughed and laughed. And I got hold of his head and I put his face into the table. With that, all his mates came round, big fight, all hell broke loose. Pub was shut down, police were called. I picked up a bag and I said, "I'm going home." And I set off walking from Torridon to the Lake District, 400 miles, at 11 o'clock at night, pissed out my head, freezing cold. And it was on this walk where I can't really explain what happened. I think I fell down a banking, going for a wee. And when I fell down this banking, as far as I can remember, I can't remember the exact details of what happened before, but I remember like it is just 5 minutes ago what happened after. I left my body. When I say that, it wasn't something I could see, but I left this realm and I entered into the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. And it wasn't of this earth, or at least it didn't appear to be. It was a space within myself. I think it's possibly death. It was the most beautiful thing, the most unconditional love, a place I didn't want to leave, but I knew that if I left, I wouldn't be going back to my body. But I didn't want to leave. I still, in spite of that fact, I wanted to stay in that space. But life wasn't up for that, and I found myself back in my body, and my body had found its way into the middle of the road where it was sat down and it was crying, and I re-entered my body and my senses came back alive and I realized I'm back. That didn't change my life, but it showed me something. It showed me a couple of things, in fact. Firstly, it showed me that there is more to this life than this three-dimensional existence. There is deeper, and it is in everybody. And secondly, what I noticed was I could ask for things to take place in the world, events, and they would happen. I realized I could get things to happen in the world just by asking. And it wasn't long after that I met the most amazing lady, who isn't on actually, a lady called Sue Huginson. I was a tree surgeon, and she called me to go and look at a tree, and I went round to a garden late one night. I was cold, I was wet, I was pissed off. And I looked around the garden before I knocked on the door, and she didn't have a tree in her garden. I was even more pissed off. And I knocked on the door and I said, Sue. She said, yes. I said, you haven't got a tree in your garden? She said, no, it's over there. Just kind of didn't even look. She just kind of pointed and waved. And she said, I said, have you got permission for me to work on that tree? She said, nope. And I was like, oh. And she said, please come inside and sit down and have a cup of tea. So I did, and I sat down, and I remember her words. She said to me, if I told you why I had to get you here, you wouldn't have come, would you? I said, do you mind me asking why you've got me here? She said, because I've been told I need to teach you something. I said, and who's told you what, thinking who's talking about me behind my back? Who have you been talking to? And she said, the universe. Well, I can't really, I was livid. But I looked Sue in the eye, and Sue's got the most beautiful blue eyes. And I trusted her in that moment. And she introduced me to the principles. It took me 9 weeks. I thought I understood it. I had it all up here. I could say the words, until one day Sue told me off because I hadn't done anything. I hadn't bought any books of Sid or anything like that. I hadn't looked him up on YouTube. That time there's 4 videos online of Sid Banks on YouTube. She rang me up one morning and told me off. I was getting ready to go to work. I was also planning my own suicide at that time as well. I was going to hang myself. I was just trying to figure out where am I going to do it, which isn't going to taint somewhere for my family and friends. And it's mad what you think about. And I went for a walk after listening to Sid on these 4 videos, and I jumped in my van, picked Rusty up, and we're going to go up Long Sledle, I think, a valley in the Lake District. I took the day off work. And at some point, I just felt this urge to pull over, and I pulled over into a lay-by. And when I pulled over into a lay-by, I was stood looking over Kendal, my local town. And as I did that, a jackdaw flew over. And as it flew over, I just noticed it. I looked up, and it looked down at me, and it carried on. And in that moment, the most monumental change took place. Again, it was another one of these bizarre experiences. I say bizarre only because I don't fully understand it. But it was more of an earthbound experience, this one for me personally. And I found myself in a woodland 2 miles away, present. Suddenly to come back to observe my own body looking over a wall, back over a wall at my own body, stood there on the side of the road. And then time became a kind of fluid thing which I could see into. And I was told certain things like humanity, there are gifts within consciousness and thought that humanity is not consciously evolved enough yet to fully utilize, but it's coming. And other bits that I can't really explain, I've just kind of got fleeting memories of it. And then I found myself back in my body. And again, I'm quite an emotional bloke. I'm not ashamed to cry. I stood there and I cried my eyes out because what I experienced again was so beautiful. But this time I was free. This time I was free, and the whole world had changed in front of my eyes. And I knew in that moment what I needed to do in my life. And I'm somebody who cares passionately about nature. I love nature. I stopped cutting trees at that point, or not long afterwards, because I gained insight into the nature of consciousness and beings and life. And I've got such deep respect for it all. But I knew what I needed to do in my life, and my desire in this life is to help people find happiness, is to help people find peace. Peaceful human beings will change the world. It starts inside each and every single one of us. The external world is a manifestation of our internal world. If our internal world is chaos, the external world will be chaos. If humanity's internal is chaos, the external will be chaos. If the internal reality of humanity is peace, the world will be peaceful. And we're all one. We're all connected. We all play a part. There isn't an us and them. It starts with us. And the way you find it, it's just by listening. Listening into something that makes your heart sing. Something that you think is truth. Something that you think is in alignment with what reality is. And bit by bit, it can either build and build and build, or it can be a cataclysmic expansion of mind, consciousness for the individual. It can be drip, drip, drip. It really doesn't matter. Everything, however it's working out for you, is perfect. There is no right way to do this. I want to set that up from the start. There is no right way. Many people look and go, I want your experience, Dave. You can't have it. Nobody else can have it. It was my experience. Nobody else can have my experience. It was my experience. Nobody can have Jenny's experience. It was Jenny's experience. So no judgments are required. that's a bit about me. And since then, I got to take the principles into the prison system for the first time in the UK, which was awesome. I loved it. I loved it. I've been to prisons, as I stated, and I met some fantastic people, which at that time was very eye-opening for myself. I got to travel with Jen, and I run a community group in my local town, and now it's online. And we've had hundreds, if not thousands, of people through it. And we see change take place within people. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to see the eyes opening and people having realizations about. One of the things we'll talk about after the break is the simplicity. You know, the simplicity of this is so, it's so simple, but our minds make it so complicated. So I'm aware of time. We've got half an hour till lunch. 35 minutes. No, I'm sorry, till break, till break. And then we just want to introduce the principles for people who may be new to this and thinking, what the hell's all this about? We want to pay our respects to Sid Banks, because it's because of Sid Banks that we both got to have this change in our lives and see the change within our families and some friends and just people we meet.
So I often say it, when I first learned the principles, it took me a couple of years to find any language to be able to communicate it with anyone else. And then it seemed I found a way to describe and explain them. But it's weird, you start to realize anything that we speak, anything we put out, is never going to quite be it. It's always going to be pointing to something. The three principles, the way that I initially learned it was almost split into 6, because Roger spoke about universal mind, and that could be described as God or energy or life force, or there's many names that have been given to this universal mind. But Sid said what came to him was this universal mind. He said these principles were gifted to him. He didn't come up with them. And then he spoke about universal thought, and that was the power of thought, the fact of thought. Not what you think, not how you think, not thinking, but a power. And then he spoke about universal consciousness. And he said another word that could be used for that was awareness. And that these principles, when they all come together, create all life, all of reality. And then it's interesting because then they made it a bit more personal. And I think, they were speaking to human beings. So they're like, and then, you've got your mind, your thought, your consciousness. And he called that personal. And then they'd completely mess you up again and be like, but it is all one. And you're like, right. So there's these 3 things. Oh no, but there's 6 things, but actually it's all one. And the beautiful thing is it doesn't matter if we think we know what the principles are. They are a descriptive way of describing whatever it is that creates reality, creates life, it's that creative force. But I know for me, I found it very helpful in those early days, starting to recognize that the reality in which I lived was my own. And the reality in which other people lived was their own, created from within them. And it clears up so much misunderstanding, because I started to see how I could see the world so differently from someone else. And it looked like I used to argue my reality as being true, right. the reality. And suddenly it was like mind-blowing to me to see that everyone feels like their reality is the true reality, because it's all that they could see. And at the time I was there with my sister, and I remember thinking, oh, that's how, when she describes growing up together in our childhood, it's like listening to a completely different story to when I described growing up in our childhood. I used to just think she had it wrong, and that I remembered it right and she remembered it wrong. And suddenly I started to see that these principles explain how we all see a different world, and that there isn't the truth and we are then, someone's right and someone's wrong. There is literally, however many beings there are on this planet, that's how many realities there are. And none of them are going to be the same. We can have similarities, but they're not the same. So for me, starting to see that whatever I think creates my world, creates my reality. And he spoke a lot about thought and feeling being one, that there isn't an external source for how we feel. And for me, being someone who had been, it's the way my sister treated me when I was younger, it's that happened when I was younger, it's my personality, it's big groups of people, they make me feel bad, it's not knowing what I want to do with my life. Like everything that I thought created my suffering was an external thing. And what came to light over those 3 days is, no, there's a much simpler answer for why we experience what we experience and why we feel what we feel. And that's because this completely innocent buying into everything that we think as true. And I think the other thing that collapsed in that moment is when you start to recognize that thought creates reality, you can see how you could be having the best day ever. One new thought, you're in a foul mood and you're totally bought into it. And we do it all the time, but we don't notice it. We just go with whatever comes. And it was like the principle seems to allow people to have a moment where they can step back and become a bit more of an observer of their own mind. You seem to get a different perspective, or a little bit more neutral. And I'd never thought to question thought. I'd never even considered that reality wasn't something that happened to us. It's something that happens through us. And that took me from being a victim of the world and circumstance and the past and other people to suddenly feeling, I don't know who I am. Everything I thought I am is a creation. Everything I believed I was a thought that I'd had at some time and believed to be true and taken it on. So it was the weirdest experience, because you see, if we stop buying into everything we think, there seems to be a space that arises in us where we get new thought, we get insight. And I think when my attention shifted from what's wrong with me, I'm not very good, I've got eating disorders, I'm shy, I'm anxious, and seeing those thoughts as thought rather than as truths, it feels like, as human beings, when that happens and we suddenly get a moment where we see that our entire identity is a creation, it gives us the opportunity for new, fresh thought and insight to come in. And so often it's way more universal, it's way more, it's beyond the personal, it's beyond the me, the I. And I look back now and I can see how, without the understanding, I was so innocently self-obsessed. All I did was think about myself and how I was feeling and how I was doing. And I just thought about myself all the time, and suddenly it's like, wow, there's other things you can think about. Don't know if you can hear Rusty's cute noises. There's other things you can think about. And I remember some of the things that used to drive me mad when I left the course, gone away back into life, I'd start thinking the same old way, and they're like, I don't have to think about this. I don't have to do this. So the principles, I feel like it's the most practical, simple, down-to-earth way of describing how reality is created. And at the same time, I've got absolutely no idea really the enormity of what that's pointing to. It's hot.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I just encourage people that keep your mind open, because every time I've thought I've known what this is, I get kind of stuck and I create another belief, and the belief's never going to be it. It's going to be another creation. But the creative force, the universal mind stuff, that's where fresh newness comes from. And I often said to you, it's almost, it gives us the opportunity to go away and play with thought, play with life, play with reality. Do you know?
Yeah.
Because you describe it quite differently from me.
No, okay, sometimes a little bit. You know,
So I can take a quick drink.
all right. See, this is how it works.
Very slow.
We have many people come to work with us, and many people have heard me say this many, many times. But it's a fundamental question. People come to us and they say, you know, I'm having a really hard life. Life's hard. Okay, life's hard. May I ask you a question? Yeah. What is life? What is life? What is this experience that we call life? What is it to be alive? Where did it come from? What thought it up? The question I'd never pondered myself until my own mind asked me that question. What is this life? What is it? We all run around in it, earning our money, trying to keep it all together, trying to change it, trying to manipulate it, trying to get one over on it. But very few people stop to ask the question, what is it? What is life? What are all these living things and people, and where did it all come from? What's it all about? And I feel like Sid came along in a language that I speak, not Scottish. Don't hear my Scottish. But in a time that, in a language, in a time that I can relate to. And he gave us some fundamental building blocks of this thing called life, this stuff called life. An explanation, a rationale, a grounding, an understanding. And he spoke about 3 principles. He said, but please understand, these 3 principles are really one. They're three characteristics of the same force that are applicable to all people, regardless of circumstance, regardless of genetics, regardless of history. And he said, the principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, he said, these are not personal principles, these are universal principles. And he said, please understand, these are also just words. I remember one of the best questions I ever got asked was by the lady who introduced me to the principle, Sue Huginson. She said, Dave, what is thought? I was an arrogant 33-year-old, massive chip on my shoulder. And I remember getting pissed off with her for asking that stupid question that she should be asking a 4-year-old, not a fully grown 33-year-old man. Don't ask me stupid questions. Don't patronize me, was what was running through my mind, or words to that effect. What is thought, Dave? I remember saying to her, no, it's an idea. She said, well done, Dave, that's a use of thought. But what is it? What is thought? I remember looking at her sat there in a chair. And then I remember saying, realizing, I don't know. What is thought? And she looked at me and she said, I don't know either. And the more I pondered that question, the more I realized that we can't know it. Thought is the creative force. We give it the word thought in psychology, in science, in everyday language. But in other aspects of life, say religion, we give it the term God. I remember being at one of Jen's retreats and a lady came in and she said, what you're saying makes an awful lot of sense because my husband he translates original biblical text. And she said, and he came in one day and he said to me, he said, I think the original translation of the opening statement of the New Testament, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He said, I think that's an inaccurate translation. She said, this was many years ago. He came and said, if I was to translate that, he said, the more accurate word that I would use would be, in the beginning was thought, thought was with God, and thought was God. She said, what you're saying makes an awful lot of sense. And the more we sit in this conversation, the more sense it starts to make. It's a really simple thing. So there is this force called thought, an infinite thing. Infinite, it has no end, it has no beginning. Can we ever get to the end of thought? Will we ever run out of new ideas, new creative potentials? Thought is infinite potential. We just have to look at all the things that are coming into the world continuously, all being dreamt up via people. I love the story. In 1920, the US Patent Office shut down the patent office because they thought everything that could be had been invented. And then with the discovery of quantum, it had to be reopened again, and off we go again. And then he spoke about this universal force called consciousness, which is not inseparable to thought. The awareness of thought, the awareness of experience, the awareness of being, the awareness of life, the life force itself, spirit, what anybody wants to call it, all just words to describe something that really exists. How do we know? Because here we are, here right now, aware of these words and dreaming whatever experience it creates. And he said, and then there's this universal force. He said, and I call it mind. He said, but not your mind, not my mind. He said, the universal force called mind, the infinite potential of the universe, the energy that creates, enlivens, lives all things, the oneness of life. The space from which all thought emerges, the space from which all consciousness emerges, the space from which all physical matter emerges, has its time and returns to. I am not a religious man, but I see great beauty in all religions, and I love looking back in time and listening to likes of Rumi, Jesus, but with a different aspect of looking from a different point of view. And there's a book called The Lost Chapter of Thomas, which was discovered in 1950 in tombs in Syria and in Egypt. And these are scrolls. It's the Book of Thomas. It was removed from the Bible, apparently 200 years after Jesus was crucified, and they were hidden. And in one of the statements, this is just a scroll with 114 sayings of Jesus, or his Aramaic name back then was Yeshua. 114 sayings of Yeshua. And in one of the statements, he said, when somebody asked him a question, all it is like a question and answer. So somebody asks a question, the question's written down, and then the answer's written down. No stories, nothing like that. Just straight up and down, straight question answer. One of the questions was, what do we tell people when they ask, where did you come from? Asking effectively about where does humanity come from? And he said, tell them you came from the light. You are going towards the light. You are the light. The light. The light of life, the light of consciousness. Everything is it. The light of mind. The everythingness of mind. It's all one. And I feel like this is what Sid's message was. It was a message of unity. It was an explanation that's been picked up by psychology, but is not psychological. I think it's fantastic that it's been picked up by psychology. But this is bigger than psychology. Psychology is a science of the mind. We're talking all-encompassing force. It's the most interesting thing I've ever looked into. It's the most expansive, it's the most giving, it's the most never-ending. And anybody who ever stumbles across this path and gains a slight sniff of insight into it, they become fascinated by themselves. Because they realize they've found something that they can depend upon, that they know is real, and they want more. Why do we want more? Because it's love. Why do we want love? Because it's beautiful. Everybody's searching for it in one way or another. Some people search for it through drugs and alcohol, trying to find that state of peace and acceptance within their own being. Some people search for it in relationships, and some people search for it in money. Some people search for it in power and status. They're trying to find peace. And Sid came along and said, do you know why you don't experience peace? Because you misunderstand reality. You misunderstand what is life. I had no idea how reality was created until I realized it was true. That there is this force. We call it thought. And the moment we call it thought, we assume we know what it is. You cannot know it. To know thought is like walking out, how I liken it to, is like walking out into the Sahara Desert, picking up a grain of sand and going, oh, that's the Sahara Desert, that. No, that's an aspect of it. Like a thought is an aspect of thought. It's a potential. It's the collapsing of the infinite potential of thought into a singular potential. That is not the expansiveness of the infinite. We cannot know it. It cannot be known. It is unknowable, which means that our very essence is unknowable to ourselves. We are too grand. We are too big. We are too infinitely beautiful for our finite egoic mind to understand. And it doesn't matter whether people try and figure that out or not. It doesn't care. It's just the way it is. Everybody is an amazing event called life. Everybody are these principles which are just words. We're just speaking words now. If you go beyond the words and at some point you realize the fact, you find something. And it will shift your life in a moment, bang, like that. It does not take years to find mental health and freedom. It already exists within ourselves. The only thing that covers it up is the beliefs that we carry around. Beliefs, thoughts. Thought's not a linear thing. Thought's not something that we can describe. Anybody who thinks they can describe thought, no, we're talking infinite dimension. We're talking infinite potential. We're talking creative force. Human beings are so capable, but we limit ourselves with belief. We're so capable. We're capable of things that we're not even aware we're capable of yet. Because we're magic. Everyday magic for the unwitting conjurer. Everyday magic for the unwitting conjurer. We're all unwitting conjurers. We're all magic. We are all unwittingly conjuring up reality continuously, from birth till death and beyond. Everyday magic. That's what this life is. And we are the creator of it. It's a beautiful thing when you start to realize you're not a victim. You never have been and you can't be. Excuse me. And the freedom exists in the expansion, not the contraction of beliefs. The freedom emerges with the release of beliefs. It's only beliefs that keep us stuck. Doesn't matter what stuckness it is, it's only a belief that keeps us stuck. It's a thought thick. What is thought? Doesn't take time. Time exists in thought. Thought does not exist in time. Time is an idea of consciousness. Time is an idea of creation. So we don't speak about Sid because we worship him like a guru. We speak about Sid because he was an everyday bloke, Scottish welder, who had a profound realization that changed his life and changed our lives, and has changed lives of countless people around the planet. This isn't about guru worship or anything like that, anything but. It's about the realization of his message, the magnitude of his message, the potential of his message, and the freedom of his message. The hope and the gratitude. Right, we're going to take a break.
And we spotted the mistake on the itinerary just before we started. The break is until 11:30. So the second session doesn't start at 11:15. It starts at 11:30.
Yeah, so
you said time doesn't exist. Anyway.
Time doesn't exist. So we're going to come back at 11:30 UK time, which is effectively 15 minutes away for everybody else. Thank you, Ron.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the simplicity. And it's funny, whenever we create the itinerary, I know that the heading will be a kind of direction, but we'll never stick to it. It is really because most people like to have some kind of sense of an itinerary. And I loved one of the first events where my niece, Lily, when she was about 15, she came to a 3-day event, and I asked her on the second day how she was enjoying it. And she said, I really, really enjoyed the first day. And she goes, today's been all right. She goes, but are you just saying the same thing over and over again in different ways? And I said, yes, in some ways that is what we're doing. And then we throw in stories and different things, because I know that it's often through stories that people can hear this. And that's why we have got quite a section every single day where we open it up to questions, observations and reflections, because it's not just through us. Like, we're all teachers and we're all learners on this call. We're not experts. But I think the simplicity of what Sid saw and how I've interpreted it has been that we've got a very complex psychology system on planet Earth. Right, I'm just going to let a couple of people in.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
That's all right. We've got so many theories and ideas about why people are like they are. And we've got so many theories about, if this happens to you, then it means this. And it feels like the world's got very complicated. And I feel like the principle strips it bare again and brings us back to the present moment. Because the present moment is all that we have. The present moment is all that exists. It's only through thought, consciousness, mind, that we can travel through time within our own minds and visit the past and visit the future, our imagination of the future. But the principles brings us right back to now, to this moment in time, of where and how reality is being created. And that's something that I feel was one of the most powerful messages of Sid's teachings, because I'd spent a huge amount of time in therapy trying to unravel my past to find out where I'd gone wrong, to why I felt like I did then. And each week I could find new things. I could always remember stories or come up with what I now call excuses of why I was like I was. But when we start to get a clearer feel for what reality is and where it exists, we find ourselves in the present moment more and more of the time. And the reason why that's powerful is because it is all that exists. It's where we are built to live. It's where we're built to thrive. In the present moment is where we are creative, insightful, productive, responsive.
Safe.
But I know that I have had car journeys where I arrive somewhere, I'm like, how the hell have I made it here? I have not been present with the road. I've literally been in the past or in a story. And you see how convincing and loud thought is in creating reality for us. So why would we question whether or not we're actually sat here right now, or whether we're lost in a story of something that happened 20 years ago? And I've actually enjoyed, since coming across the principles, being able to look back at life and time travel and bring things back to life, but with a whole new understanding and respect for what it is that creates. And I think one of the other things that released me so much through this simple understanding was that it suddenly made sense of why people do what they do. And like one of my mum's favourite sayings is, what I don't understand is, and it was something that I used to say a lot because I couldn't understand how people mistreated animals. I couldn't understand, like one of the things when I was younger was I'd seen something on the television about the famine that was happening out in Ethiopia. And it troubled me. It really troubled me. And I couldn't understand how we didn't help more. Or I couldn't understand how people could live like that. And it put so much on my mind. And this understanding suddenly explained that the reason people do what they do is because they think like they think in the moment. And that if we don't understand the mind and we don't understand the nature of thought, then we act out of it completely innocently. And I think that's why watching the videos of the principles being shared in prisons impacted me so much, was because I'd always believed that people in prison were bad. There were bad people and good people, and they're evil people and good people. And I had so much judgment, which created a lot of fear. But I think when Rogers shared this, he spoke a lot about his work in Modelo and Lockwood Gardens, different projects that he'd run across America. And what he realised is when he spoke to people's humanity, what he called their health, he got that back from them. So he was working in projects where he said ambulances wouldn't go in without police escorts. I think the Modelo project, there's a book written by Jack Pransky that talks about it way more. But he said there'd have been a white psychologist murdered there 6 months before he went in with the principles. And he saw that for the first part of any program that he ran, he would just be getting to know people and getting rapport. But he said the thing that he knew for sure was that at the heart of every single being is innate health and well-being. And it can get so covered up by story, belief, thought, things that have happened to us. So we create characters to survive. but he never spoke to the character. He never spoke to the behavior. He spoke to the place inside that hadn't been touched or tarnished. And he knew it was true, and he believed it to be true. And then that's what he started to get back. And I often say that was the simple thing that I think really woke me up, is that I was there with all of my stories of suffering and brokenness and not good enoughness. And Roger didn't even acknowledge any of that stuff. He just spoke to me. And the more that he engaged with me, the more that truer self came forward. And I think being able to share this around the world, you realise I used to get quite caught up. How are we going to share this? And there's so much to say, and they've got to understand. But in a way, I feel like it just brings you back to the present moment. And in the present moment, you know how to connect and communicate with people. So even though we might tell the same stories on courses and things, I know that when I work with people, I can find myself telling them things or having conversations. I'm like, why am I? But that story or that message was exactly what they needed to hear in that moment. And I feel like when we can clear up some misunderstanding, which in a way is what the principles allows us, we suddenly realize our innate ability to be in this life and navigate it for the best for us. We have a natural ability to communicate. And I'll often laugh because my little nephew Archie is very much like I used to be when I was little. He's 10 at the moment. But I've said to Dave sometimes, I'm like, oh, Archie came out tonight. He's like, what do you mean? Like, we went to a meetup a few weeks ago. A lot of people we had not met before. It was a discussion about creating new communities. And for some reason, I just went right back into my head and got really insecure and didn't really know how to talk to anyone and didn't want to have to get eye contact. I was really quiet. But the humour I have around that now and the lightness I have around that used to cripple me, and it used to prevent me doing anything. I used to be so embarrassed of it. So we often say this quite on the first day, these principles aren't an anaesthetic to life. You're still going to feel, you're still going to get lost in thought creations, but it feels more and more of the time you move through it quicker, a bit more grace, a little bit less judgment,
more awareness.
And then as we see it for ourselves, we see it in other people. So our relationships get easier. Our communication skills get better. Our listening gets better. Like you said, you thought you were a good listener. But I hadn't realised how much of the time, especially with family, I would never really listen to them. I was listening to what I already thought about them, my own version, my own character. And when I came back from that 3 days in London, it was like I got to meet a whole new family, because I was like, I got to see them with like fresher eyes. And again, that's coming back. And there's so many books written about being in the present moment, the power of now, and all of those things. We know that it's a really good idea to be present, but it's very hard to do being present, because when you're trying to be present, you're in your head thinking. But the simplicity of the principles is that the more that we can
Sorry, love.
That's right. A couple of people in. The more that we can let go of what we think we know, a quiet mind is what seems to come. And I think sometimes people think a quiet mind is a mind without any thought. But I see it more now as a mind that isn't attaching to any thought.
It's outside of judgment.
And it's a freedom that you can think whatever you want. This isn't about a certain way of thinking. But I think we get more discerning when we see. I remember hearing it as you are the first recipient of what you think. And it really hit me because there were certain resentments that I hadn't let go of. And I'd mull them over and think about them. But that statement really struck me. I'm the first recipient of what I think. I'm the one who's going to experience that creation in this moment. And there's infinite of things that we can think about. This power of thought stuff is so vast, I can't get my head around it. But I've seen kind of in my Three Principles life gone from when we started the Three Principles movie site, we had teleconferences. And the first time we ever tried to do the teleconferences. And then suddenly there's this thing called Zoom. And we're like, what is Zoom? And you could actually have video calls with people and video conferences. And so all of this has kind of happened since I came across the principles. And you can see that that's all come from thought. It's all come from someone's original thought that they put into creation. And I often tell this story because we worked with some young teenagers out in South Africa, and they were all very, very into the academic studies and doing well. And when they had sort of found out a little bit more about Sydney Banks, they're like, well, how did he know this stuff if he hadn't read loads of books and if he wasn't really educated? And I remember looking at their faces and I just thought, and I said to them, how do you think information gets into books? Where does information come from? Where does it come from? What we've learned en masse as humanity. Where did the ideas come from? And they were just completely flummoxed, weren't they? Mm. And you said, I know at least one of them was thinking Google. But it made them stop and think. And then what was cool is we then got to have the dialogue of that same place where all of that stuff comes from is what we are connected to.
What we're made of.
That original source of life, of reality, of all, is what is at the heart of all of us. And we were saying to him, any one of you could come up with an idea or an invention or that could change the world, that could be completely brand new to the world. And I think for them, that was quite a big idea, because their learning had been very much about, you learn this information to then regurgitate it in exams and get good results. And that meant you were clever. And we said, that's one form of cleverness. But actually, what about this original thought stuff? That's within you. And that's how there's been times in all of our lives where there'll be something that we feel we have never dealt with before, and we have no idea how we're going to cope with it or deal with it. And then something comes to mind and we deal with it and we cope with it. Because we're not limited to what we've thought before. We're totally connected to the vastness of all information of all times.
It's like that sentence in people may know it, a man named Kahlil Gibran, an Islamic poet, and he writes some, I think it's from the 1920s. He wrote some of the most beautiful things I've ever really read. But he does a poem about children. I'd advise anybody to look it up. Kahlil Gibran, The Prophet, the book is called. You can find it online, and if you type in Cahill Gibran poems, you'll find them online under images and stuff. But he said, this person asked him about children. Tell us about children. And then so he says this thing about children, which is just amazing. But in one of the lines, he says about children, you may give them your love, but not your thoughts. For their thoughts dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you may not visit, not even in your dreams. And then he goes on to say, for life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. That's a couple of lines out of that poem. You know, all this new information that keeps coming into the world, keeps coming into our being is like, this is the evolution of God. It's the evolution of consciousness. It's the evolution of things. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. And when you were saying that about the kids, you can see how in education today, Jenny often tells me off because I sound like I'm knocking education. In a lot of respects, I think the education system needs a frigging good cleanup. But we give yesterday's information to the children of tomorrow. Life is going backwards. We are creating a system whereby life is going backwards. We're not, the true meaning of the word education is to draw out information. And as far as I can see, and from what I remember, it was very much not that. It was about, you remember this, you regurgitate it, and you put it down on a piece of paper, and how well you've remembered it and figured it out, you can be graded on your intelligence. You cannot grade intelligence. Intelligence isn't a thing that can ever be graded. Intelligence is the fabric of life. And everybody is the most intelligent person. It's like we're seeing now an awful lot of children suffering a great deal. They're struggling with their exams, they're struggling with this, you know, and the amount of kids that just say, I'm just not very clever. And I remember saying this to your nephew, Archie. He's been taken out of school now, and he's in a forest school, which I wish I could have gone to. And he said within the first week, he said to his mum, I feel cleverer. He was struggling keeping up with the mainstream system. And he come to the conclusion he wasn't very clever, which is a very demoralizing place for an individual to find themselves. It's not a constructive place. So Kath, she took him out of school. I remember sitting with Arch and I said, Arch, are you interested in what you're learning at school? And he said, no. I said, then you probably won't become a genius at it. I said, tell me, mate, what are you interested in? He said, Pokemon. I said, all right, Pokemon. I said, in this car with Jenny, you and I, who's the genius on Pokemon in this car? And he went, me. I said, yes, that's right. You are far more intelligent about Pokemon than we are because you're interested in it. And anybody's a genius at what they're interested in. And we're all different. Every single one of us is different. We all have our own likes and dislikes. There is, I often say, like, the schooling system is trying to fit people into a box. Everybody into the same box. There is only one human-shaped box. It's called a coffin. Trying to put people into a box kills them. We need to allow this understanding of the mind and individuality within the whole. to start to come to the fore, so that people can start to, and this is what this is bringing to the world. It's bringing people. One thing that I noticed within myself was I suddenly realized I had this gift of free will. Beforehand, I believed everything I was told, everything I read. I believed stuff I saw on the news. And then when I woke up, after I woke up, I suddenly became far more discerning when I realized that everybody is living in a separate reality. And there are some people on this planet who are projecting their reality out as fact and hoping that other people will pick it up and run with it. You can create the reality if people believe in it. But one of the things that occurred for me was I suddenly became far more discerning. I suddenly started to see that people live in their own realities, their own thought-created realities, which look, like Jenny said right at the beginning, it looks real. It looks real. And that's the game. That's what this is all about. This is supposed to look real. We're creators of reality. I then became more skeptical. And skepticism is a word that gets a bad rep. Skeptics. Oh, you don't want to be a skeptic. Yeah, we absolutely do want to be a skeptic. I remember listening to a book one time. I forget what it was. I think it was called The Five Agreements, something like that. It's apparently it's Mexican Toltec, if I remember rightly. And there's this beautiful sentence in this book. And this man says, be skeptical of everything that you read. Be skeptical of everything that you see. He said, but most of all, the 4 agreements, thanks, Sarah. But most of all, be skeptical of what you think. What we think is not truth. It appears as truth. It appears as truth so much we've never questioned it. And this is where humanity has landed.
I liked it just on the break. Dave said, I felt a bit tight texting your auntie because we're at my auntie's house and asking her to turn down whatever she was listening to. And I said, oh, was she listening to something? And you were like, yeah, I thought you were really distracted with it. I was like, I hadn't even heard anything was on. But you see, because you had the thought, I can hear that, Jenny looks distracted, Jenny's distracted by that, it created this whole reality for you. And it was only because you mentioned it that you realised, oh no, that wasn't the case. I hadn't even noticed anything was in the other room. But you see how it's right there. Why would we question it? Like, it's our creation.
It looks real. And I remember I watched quite recently, I went back and I looked for the videos that I watched when I first woke up to Sid. And it was a video, he's gone into something Hope in America somewhere. I think he sat down talking to psychologists. And he said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing probably, he said, it's all an illusion. And you lot are working with that illusion, effectively trying to fix the illusion with the illusion. And he said, the thing is, it's not real. You just think it's real. The thing is, it's not real. You just think it's real. He was talking about reality. He was talking about this very moment, this very experience. He's talking about I think Jenny's being distracted by something that's playing in the other room. I thought that was real. It appears real. It appears so real. It appears so true that Jenny's being distracted by what's going on in the other room. Only to find out it wasn't, but it appeared so. Correct. Creating our own drama. That's all we do. We're in constant creation mode and we cannot get out of it. It's the game. And if it's a game, many people say, well, here's the instructions on how to play it. This is its foundation. This is how it works. I know that beforehand, I didn't know how life, I had no inclination. I had no inclination towards spirituality until it didn't give me a choice and slapped me around the face. And when I say spiritual, I'm not meaning religion. I'm not meaning a practice. I'm not meaning a doing or a being or anything of spiritual, but the fact of everything is divine. Everything is a divine creation. There is only one of it. There is only that is happening, and we are all that. But we are the dream state getting lost in its own dreams. I often liken it to an ocean confusing itself for a wave. That can be seen on a micro scale and on a macro scale. On a micro scale, it's humanity. It's all things that look different in the duality of life, the appearance of duality of life. Everybody is effectively a wave on the ocean of the universe, as is every planet, as is every plant, as is every moon, galaxy, every other being that exists throughout the universe. And on a macro level, it's the self. We confuse ourselves for thoughts. We confuse ourselves for beliefs. Like, you ask people, who are you? And they'll give you a name. And they will give you a job title. They'll give you an age. They'll give you a sexuality. They'll give you a sex. Well, these are all things that we've made up. These are identities that we hold on to. I remember speaking to one lad and said, describe yourself. And he went, I'm ginger, 19, live in Windermere. I'm a brickie. I'm like, all right. Your hair will probably go grey one day. So you're not ginger. It's not who you are. Because that's up for change. That can change. Next year you're going to be 20. So you won't be 19 anymore. So that's up for change. That's changeable. That's not who you are. You could get a different job. Become a baker. So your job is not who you are. You live in Windermere, you could move to Kathmandu. That's not who you are. But we identify with these concepts and memories and ideas. And this is the ego. This is what is defined as ego. An illusion of self, waves, like the ocean mistaken in itself for a limited wave. We're none of those things. The mind is the ocean. It's all the same mind. There is no separation between any of us. We are all a product of the same force that creates the physical universe. Some in religion, they call the creator of the energy behind the universe, they call it God, Allah, Buddha, whatever anybody wants to call it, Jehovah, Hashem. And then they would say that that is the masculine, God the Father. And then it would be described as in the creation, the actual physical creation that exists is the feminine. But the two are one. Masculine and feminine are one. When you start getting back to singularity, it is very simple. Because in singularity, you realize there is nothing to fear at all, ever. There is only the illusion of things to fear the moment we step into duality, which doesn't exist, but is an illusion of our own mind. It's a belief system. It's an identification with the physical and memories, as opposed to the universal principles, as opposed to realizing we are source, energy, creating, rather than realizing we are source, energy, creating, we've mistaken ourselves for our creations. Perhaps other people have told us their creations for us, and we've carried them and we've taken them on. Perhaps at some point we were told we were useless, and we believed it. We had to believe it in order for that to become our reality as an experience. Not good enough, not worthwhile. One of my big ones was, why should I be happy when there's so much suffering in the world? Why should I be happy? And I really suffered that belief, crippled me. Why do I deserve to be happy when there's so much suffering in this world? Yeah, that one really did a number on me. And it was only when I woke up I realized, one, when I look out with pity from my eyes at other people, I've got no idea their experience of life. I have no idea of another person's experience of life. I am just casting a judgment. And two, my bringing more suffering into this world does not make it happier or better. It just brings more suffering, which does the very opposite of what I was hoping to achieve. I remember meeting this man, Ben, out in South Africa when Jen and I were working out there. Ben was a homeless man. I mentioned at the beginning, this can be a very humbling journey. You get to see your ego firsthand. Jen and I went to one of our favourite restaurants. It was called Raw and Roxy. We like raw food. We like eating raw vegetables and stuff. And we're just hippies in chavs clothing. Fine. And there was a lot of food, wasn't there? And I said, I'm going to go and give this to the first homeless person I meet. It just so happened this first homeless person I met was this man who'd had a stroke and was physically disabled. If you go on our website, you'll see a photograph of me crouched down with him. He's on there. He's on there because he was a man of that really had an impact on my life. I sat down with this man and I gave him this food and he took it off me. I was dressed in all my nice Ted Baker stuff because I've been working in this charity. And I sat down next to this disabled man who'd had a stroke, who I could barely understand, who was covered in flies and he stunk. He hadn't had a shower in a long time. And my heart went out to this man. And I sat down with him. And he said, thank you. I said, you're welcome. He said, may I ask you your name? I said, yes. I said, my name's Dave. He said, Dave, may I tell you what a beautiful expression of God you are? What a beautiful face of God you are. I said, thank you, Ben. I said, and so are you. He went, I know. He said, we're all beautiful faces of God. And this man beamed pure love, buoyancy, happiness. He laughed, he smiled. And at the end, I must have spoke to him for how long? 20 minutes, half an hour. This stunning looking man came up, beautiful looking fella. I always say if he was in the UK, he'd be snapped up by a modelling agency. He's a homeless fella out in South Africa. Came along. I said, that man is beautiful to this other homeless man that came to help him. He said, oh, everybody loves Ben. Everybody loves Ben. And with that, I emptied my pocket. I took out all the money. I had about £60 in rand. I said, Ben, take that, please. And he pushed it back. And he said, Dave, do you not see? It's not about that. It's about this. It's about people. And with that, I just burst into tears and I walked back to the car and I sat there and I cried. Highlighted, you think you've seen something about life. That man had nothing, but he had everything. And this is what Sid was trying to point out. Everybody has everything they need within them. Ben didn't have a scrap of negativity coming from him. Didn't have a scrap of I'm hard done to, you're white, you're rich, you scumbag, your type put me on the street. He didn't judge me for having nice clothes. He just loved me and I loved him. Deeply humbling. We never know what somebody else's experience of life is like. People find it in the most inexplicable, unexpected ways. And all it is people awakening to the divinity within themselves. It is going from the egoic state, the state that is completely unaware of the divine dream that reality truly is. It's the dream state lost in its own dream, like an ocean lost in its own waves. It's a dream state identifying itself as the dream, like an ocean identifying itself simply as waves. There's an awesome man on here. I keep seeing him come and go. Chris Ingledew. Chris is a deep sea diver. I said to Chris one day, I said, Chris, what's it like when you get in the water, say the North Sea areas? What's it like when you get in the North Sea and you're on your rigs? What's it like when you first get in? He went, choppy, cold. I said, Chris, what's it like when you descend 10 meters down? He said, stillness, calm. And I remember him saying, sometimes you look up and you can't believe what's going on up the top, on the surface. He said, because 10 meters down, you just sat in stillness. Doesn't matter how choppy it is on top. You sat in stillness 10 meters down. I said, that's it. We get lost in the turbulence of our own creations. And underpinning the turbulence of our own creations is perfect stillness. It's perfect beauty. The only reason why we cannot see it is because we are lost in our own creations, our own beliefs, our own thoughts, our own perspectives, our own identities, all created from the same thing, the same ocean of thought. Underpinning it, our truest state of being, our truest essence, the thing that doesn't go anywhere, is the ocean of self. There is no limit. There is no limit upon what wave pattern an ocean can create. It's infinite potential of wave pattern. It's the same thing as our mind. The ocean's perfect. So are all the waves. There is no such thing as a wrong thought. There is no such thing as a wrong feeling. Wrong does not exist to nature. There are no wrong trees. There are no wrong plants. There are no wrong birds. There are no wrong fungi. There are no wrong leaves. There are no wrong clouds. There are no wrong suns. There are no wrong galaxies. It's all the same thing. There are no wrong people. It's all made of the same thing, in varying degrees of lostness. People are just in varying degrees of lostness, varying degrees of being bought into the illusion of their life. And it's nobody's fault. It's just the way it is. I understood what heaven and hell were when I woke up. And this is something Jesus Christ tried to tell people. He said, the kingdom of heaven exists within the heart of every man, woman, and child. God's kingdom exists within the heart of every man, woman, and child. The Creator. Jesus wasn't a religious man. He was a man who realized life. And he tried to teach people life. He tried to educate people on life. The kingdom of heaven exists within the heart of every man, woman, and child, as does hell. Hell is heaven's polar opposite. And hell is created by illusion, fear. Hell and heaven are states of mind. That's why he said, when you forgive, you go to heaven. You come out of hell, your grudge state, your judgment state, your hatred state. That's your hell. Nobody else feels that. Only you feel those negative feelings. And the moment you forgive, you enter heaven. Because they're states of consciousness, not places.
I think Goodell Safu, who I mentioned earlier, is someone who, the moment we met him, I think we knew he was going to become a good friend and is like a teacher to us in so many ways. And he's someone who he first listened in on a 3-day training we ran in, I think, July 2018. I don't know if Leanne's on, but
No,
a lady we'd worked with out in South Africa said, I'd love to see this in a charity or in a business setting or somewhere. And we said, look, you guys are pioneers out in South Africa. There isn't any projects happening. If you want to see it, you're going to have to create it. And within 2 days, she'd managed to arrange for us to go into a charity, and it happened to be Goodell's charity. And he's got this beaming smile, hasn't he?
Oh,
He came out and
awesome.
Introduced us and showed us around. And he was actually in and out of the training over the 3 days because he had different physiotherapy appointments, and because he runs the charity, he had work he needed to do. So we wouldn't have known how impacted he'd been if we hadn't asked him, could we interview you? And the interview is on our website. And he said at the age of about 19, 20, he became physically disabled after a football injury. And at that time, he'd been living in monasteries from the age of 11 to become a Catholic priest. And he said out in South Africa, to become a Catholic priest, you can't if you're physically disabled. And he said he fell out with God. But he was still a very connected human being, and he got refuge in South Africa. He'd fled the DR Congo, and he hadn't been there that long when there was a xenophobic attack. I think it's 2008, and his home was petrol bombed, and everyone else was able to get out, but he wasn't, because he was in a wheelchair. But luckily a neighbour had called the police, and the police saved him. And from that, he decided he wanted to create a safe space for refugees and physically injured and disabled people in South Africa, not just refugees. So he created a charity, and he's known to the UN, and he created this amazing place for people. So in so many ways, he had already gone above and beyond what you'd think would be possible for him. He just had no hate. He
didn't hold any.
He wasn't a victim of any of the things that happened within his life. And the thing that the principles brought for him, and he says it in his interview, is that he went from a God out there, far, far away, judging him, to a God in here. And he says he realized that somehow he was that God. And it just lit something else up in him. Like he already glowed, he glowed more. And then every time we get to speak to him, he's learning, he's shedding. And one of the stories that really struck me was during, I think it was in end of 2020, mid-20, I can't remember when, he had raised enough money to be able to go back to the DR Congo to put gravestones on his parents' graves. And that was something really important to him. And he arrived at Johannesburg airport to get his flight with Philippines,
it was
Ethiopia Airlines.
We'll share them.
And they refused him to get on the flight because he was in a wheelchair.
And he'd paid for his ticket.
So he was just left with all his bags. And he said he felt...
Somebody saw what was happening and took photographs, didn't they, and put it out on social media.
But he felt so humiliated by that because he realised something about his ego. And he said that night he went home, he was in such a bad mood. He was horrible to his family. He was horrible to his wife. He felt so sorry for himself. And he said the next morning when he woke up, what came to him was the aspect of his ego that was ashamed of his disability and was embarrassed that he'd then been put on social media and people got to see him in his chair and being
viral,
left. And he was giving thanks for the experience because of what he'd seen about his own ego, and that he'd seen through it. And he was almost joyous and understanding. And he'd lost a huge, like, the flight
wage.
And also 2 weeks worth of accommodation he'd paid for.
It was 2 months' wage, wasn't it?
Something like that. But he always has eyes for learning and for seeing again. And he shares so humbly, and he was very honest about, that night he was not nice to his family. He wasn't nice to himself. He had nothing. He was so angry and sad. But he has the ability, it seems, to just look for beauty in the world. And he spoke at the big conference last year, and one of the things he shared was, because there'd been quite a lot of talk about what had been happening in the world and some of the negativity happening in the world, but what he had seen was that in Germany, a church had opened its doors on...
The Catholic Church had opened its doors to Muslims.
Yeah, because their space wasn't big enough to have social distancing. So they'd opened their doors to allow Muslims to go and have their holy day there. And it's like he's always looking for the beauty in the world. Because if you look for it, it's there, it's everywhere. Kindness, love. And we don't realize that what we see is a reflection of our mind, where our mind is at. And that isn't in a judgmental way. Like, I know that there may be people on here who are experiencing hard times or suffering at the moment, so it's not a judgment thing. But you see that we cannot experience reality without our own mind. We cannot see life but through the lens of our own thinking. But that is the good news, because thought changes. And the more that we appreciate and gain respect for this power of thought, the more we allow our mind to change. Because I know that I have a stubborn refusal on certain things which create real discomfort in my life, but I'm unwilling to let go of them. I'm unwilling to give them up. But even that, I'm like, wow, it doesn't matter what you think you know. Insight comes when insight comes. And that being here and being alive and being human, we see out. We see self and other. We see in a dualistic way. So in so many ways, I think we do amazingly well to get along with one another, to live as harmoniously as we do so much of the time, given how differently we all see the world, given the different realities that we have going on for us. But the nice thing is that I used to spend so much time trying to do life right and trying to fix myself and trying to be somebody. The principles understanding, or the principles awareness, seems to just allow us to be more fluid, allow us to change. It allows our mind to change quicker. It's not about always having beautiful thoughts, or it's not about always being in a peaceful state of mind. But understanding seems to pull us back. But so much, and you often speak about this, so much of your learning has taken place through lostness, getting totally caught up in the illusion, being totally judgmental, losing your temper or feeling frustrated. And the feeling state that we are in is an amazing indicator of how lost in duality we are. So I think I used to always go to war with my feelings and think they meant something about me, whereas now I can see feelings are an indicator of my mind. of thought, whether seen or unseen. And that phrase of, I think Elsie used it on one of our webinars. She just said, where do you want to live? Someone was talking about the extreme anxiety that they felt, and she listened and she showed respect for this lady's story, but then she said, but where do you want to live? Do you want to live in anxiety or do you want to live in well-being? And so much of the time, we don't even realize there is a choice or a shift that can happen because we're so lost in it. But the moment we're awakened to what's happening, it doesn't mean the feeling necessarily disappears immediately, but it gives us more autonomy. It gives us more freedom. It often comes with, I know for myself, like if I'm in a really bad mood, but I've got a sense of it, like keep your mouth shut right now. Or I'll say to you, I'm in a really foul mood, nothing nice is going to come out of my mouth today. Then actually sometimes by the end of breakfast or lunch, it might have completely changed.
Or a week.
Do you reckon?
I'm sure.
But it's that freedom of mind. This isn't a judgment thing. This isn't a goal thing. It's not like a goal you're going to get to, of suddenly reaching this state of perfection where you never take life personally, you only see in the singular. Like I haven't met anyone that lives in that space all the time, but I know so many people that get to have a glimpse of it and then it changes their life on a day-to-day basis.
What was it Paul said? Got a friend who had his own experiences. He'd be classed as a non-dual teacher. And
Even though he thinks that's funny.
Even though, yeah, he says non-duality doesn't exist. But he said when people came along and they were talking about, he went to a retreat one time, you were telling me, and he went along and he listened to everybody speaking and saying they want to get rid of this. He said they want to get rid of that. And he said, what you're all asking for is death. You're all asking to die. Because being human is about total freedom. The total freedom to end up to the point of not being able to cope with life because we create such harrowing realities, right the way through to the most unconditional love. Total freedom. One of the things that I kind of said when I woke up was I died. But when I say I wasn't talking about me, as in the spirit, the consciousness. I was talking about the character. Dave, the thing that I thought I was, this hard man, family protector, blah, 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 whatever else I was carrying around as an identity. All the things that I thought served me, but were in actual fact my prison. That died. It died the moment I realized what it all was. It's all a game of thought. Doesn't look like it. We are conscious thinking beings, as is every other living thing. The death is the death of the character, because the energy of self can't die. And what we're afraid, when people are afraid of dying, they say, oh, I won't exist. No, that character will die. The belief system will go. And the body will fall to the floor or whatever it does. But the energy that enlivens the body, that cannot be killed. You cannot destroy energy. One of the real laws of physics. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only change form, change potentials. That's another thing in the lost chapter of Thomas, when Jesus was asked, tell us how our end will be. What's death like? And Jesus said, I take it from your question, you found the beginning, but you ask me about the end. Blessed is he who takes his place in the beginning, for he will know the end and will not taste death. The beginning, end, and middle are all the same thing. You come from the light, you're going towards the light, you are the light. We're talking about death of the character, death of an ego. And people are afraid to let go of their ego. Like myself, I was afraid to let go of my hard man because I thought it kept me safe. It caused mayhem in my life, but I thought it kept me safe. The very thing, my suit of armor that I thought that was keeping me safe, I'd put on a suit of armor to take on the world, but the world wasn't at war with me. I was fighting a world that wasn't fighting back in a never-ending war. I argued, I scared people, I intimidated them, and I did that. I was a hard man because I was terrified. I was a hard man because I was scared. I was scared of people, I was scared of life, I was scared of feelings, I was scared of everything. So I thought, I'm like Rusty, like a little Jack Russell. Go on then. I'm scared that you think I'm weak. I'm scared of what you think of me. Let's fight. And just realizing it was all thought. It does something. When you suddenly realize it's thought, you realize what the mystics are talking about when they call it the dream of life. The dream of reality. It means nothing to somebody who isn't interested. It just sounds like crap. Sounds like pointless chatter, like just shit that somebody's spouting, and that's for spiritual people. But when you wake up and you realize it's real, it's true, in fact, it's what reality is. It's a dream state. That's why it changes. Just like a dream in your sleep, it appears exceptionally real. So much so that you don't realize it's a dream in your sleep, and neither does your body. So if you're being chased in your sleep state dream, fast asleep in bed state dream, you're being chased by people or a lion or something, your body doesn't know the difference. It will react with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart will pound. You'll probably wriggle around a lot. You'll sweat. Your body doesn't know the difference between sleep state dream and awake state dream, because they're both made of the same thing and they enliven. It's all the same thing enlivening the body. I was diagnosed with chemical imbalances of the brain during my depression and medicated for it. And I was told that was the sole reason for my anxiety, my anger, and my depression was I had chemical imbalance within the brain. It's funny because the moment I woke up, my chemicals went straight back to how they should be. And not one single doctor came to me and said, Dave, look, done these blood tests, they've come back, you've got a shitload of adrenaline and cortisol. I'm going for it now. A load of adrenaline and cortisol in your body, in your blood system. Not one doctor said to me, Dave, what have you been thinking a lot about lately? As if they'd asked me that, I'd have said, very violent thought, killing people, beating people up. It's thought that's occurred to me an awful lot through my life, is violent thought. Of course, my body doesn't know the difference between actually being in a fight and thinking I'm in a fight. If I think about getting into a fight deep enough, my body responds as though I'm going to war. Because the body responds to the mind continuously. The mind is the spirit, the spiritual energy of the being, thought. And we've lived in such a materialist world, especially in the West, that we've neglected the spirit. We've said it doesn't even exist, at the deficit of our very culture, the world, and our own being. We've neglected the most important part of self, the true self, the only real self, the self that isn't the story. And we pay the price for that. And it comes in depression, it comes in war, it comes in control, greed, destruction. And the only way out of that is for people to start to wake up. I remember walking down the beach with you at Table View in South Africa, and I remember I was effing and jeffing. I was looking at all the microplastics that had washed up on the beach. I was like, waffling on about it for about 2 miles, walking this beautiful beach. And Jenny stopped me. She went, Dave, are you still looking at the plastic? And I lifted my head up for the first time in probably half an hour. And I looked and I saw the sun setting behind Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was held. And it was illuminating Table Mountain, and it was bright orange, and Cape Town at the bottom of Table Mountain was just coming into light. And the sea was turquoise. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. I was missing it. I was looking at all the negative things. In my mind, what were negative. And I stood there and I got an insight. And it just said, if you want to help nature, and if you want to help clean this world up, you have to help human beings find happiness. You have to help human beings wake up. It's the only way. And it's so simple. Everybody's awake, they just don't know they're awake. Because we're lost in the dream state. We're lost in the reality. We think that our reality is real. There are 7.7 billion people on Earth right now. Every single one of us sees a totally different reality. No two people on Earth see the same reality. That's why arguments take place. That's why we all dress differently. We all have our likes and dislikes and our own little quirks and blah, 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 our own beliefs, different religions, different political systems. Which person is it on Earth that holds the true reality? Who is it who sees the true reality? If there's 7.7 billion separate realities, who is it who sees the true reality? We all see our own creation. It's an illusion. Our reality that we see is an illusion. It's a divine illusion.
I think when you get eyes for it as well, you see it more. You see it in everyday life. Like I was just thinking, like one of your things that really annoys Dave is people that drive in the middle lane.
Yeah.
On the motorways.
Reduce a 3-lane motorway down to 2 lanes.
And I've occasionally felt annoyed if I've got stuck behind someone or something, but it generally doesn't bother me that much.
You don't flash them, do you?
I don't flash them. It doesn't come to mind that much about anything about it. And then for you normally flash them and you have a few things to say about it. And then when we're driving down this time, there's obviously somebody else who it really annoys, because on loads of the bridges, there's signs to the people that drive in the middle lane, like calling them morons.
It gets progressively
more
angry. Aggressive as you go down the M6.
And you're like, yeah, I don't think it annoys me as much as it annoys whoever that person is. And you see the varying degrees of it. But it just points to something that we easily miss, which is somebody driving in the middle lane when they should really be pulling into the inside lane. I was going to call it the slow lane. I got told off my speed awareness course for calling it that. If that had the power to create an experience in another human being, everyone would have to experience it the same. But the fact is, we all experience life differently. The same stimulus creates a different response. And we haven't thought to look, well, what is that thing? What is it that creates?
Common denominator.
And it's going to be thought. It's going to be the way we think about something. And the other thing I was going to say, like, I know sometimes when Dave and I share about kind of waking up to the principles and how much it's impacted our lives, people think that we've reached a state where we don't then get fed up or get annoyed about. We do. And when you were talking about the death that took place when you really woke up to his message, there can still be elements of that character that can come back in moments. And you've got so much compassion when that does happen for you now. Whereas before there was judgment, now there's compassion. Same for myself. There's still aspects of this character that seemed to die on that day in 2005 that come back to life in a moment, and I experience it. But the understanding seems to kick in quite quickly. And I don't judge myself in the same way I used to. So again, I really want people to realize that every single person who shares this, every single teacher I've ever heard, they often try and explain to people that we're still human. We haven't got something you haven't got. We haven't transcended the human experience. But often people don't hear that and they're like, I want your experience so I can be happy all the time. And that isn't it that's not our experience. And generally the people I've heard share haven't said that message. But it does seem that there is this upward curve towards more peace, more happiness, more acceptance, love. Life seems to become less and less personal. The person in the middle lane, possibly you would have had your window open, flashed them, sworn at them. Now there's a few choice words that I get to hear and maybe a flash sometimes, and of the lights, that is. And it's do you want like a delayed response? But I think that's the thing, the laughter that can laugh at yourself can have compassion for someone else. And I don't know if Lisa is on, but she told a brilliant story at the
Which Lisa?
Lisa. She was on.
She was, wasn't she?
But she told a brilliant story about she'd just been to have this most amazing massage and was totally zenned out and reversed her work vehicle into another lady's Range Rover. And then she got out like in this blissed out state, and this woman just went mad at her and was screaming in her face and saying all this stuff to her. And she said pre-principles, before she had any understanding, she totally would have been like, what, there's hardly even a scratch on it. Like she totally would have argued back. But she said she just sort of stood there and just said, I'm so sorry. That was completely my fault. I'm really sorry. Here's my details. And this woman was so irate that she didn't even believe that she was giving the correct details. And even though she was in the work vehicle and
next to the shop, and
she didn't believe it was necessarily her vehicle. And she said it was such an interesting thing because she would have taken that incident so personally. This woman is attacking me, and she would have been on the attack. But she said she just saw this woman is really, really irate and lost in thought and so furious. There's no speaking to her. There's no common sense here. And she just had compassion for her. And they exchanged details, and then she drove off and enjoyed the rest of her night. And I think so many people that I speak to have similar stories where how they used to react suddenly doesn't make sense to them anymore. Or they're halfway through that reaction and they recognize it. Or they have more perspective after they've reacted, and they're able to apologize, and they kind of have a sense of what's happened and take responsibility. And I think the more we can take responsibility for our own world and our own well-being, if everybody started to do that, it seems like a selfish thing, but it's not, because we become more settled. Life becomes less personal. We experience more peace. And then that's what we then see into the world. We don't realize we are the creators. We are creating the world in which we live and see. So we just let it run havoc and create all kinds of illusions. And I think sometimes people think this idea of their character crumbling or death of ego and all those ideas as being a scary thing, because they think there's going to be nothing left.
You soon start recreating.
You might have a moment where it just feels like you get like that glimpse of that pure consciousness, that pure thought that Sid spoke about. But then in comes thought, new creations. And I've done it a million times since coming across the principles. This idea that my character fell away and then my true character came up, and I get totally attached to this new version. And then I'm like, wow, that's a character too. Oh, that's created from thought too. And I can let that go. And there's other aspects of my character that I think serve me pretty well. Like I was thinking last night, often I can get stressed about really silly little things. But if something big happens, for some reason, I'm able to stay really calm. That's something I find quite helpful, especially if someone's kicking off. I can generally like see past their behavior and just listen. It doesn't affect me. But like you noticed an aspect of me where I think it's very polite, and it's been something that I've grown up with. If someone does something nice for you, you send a card to say thank you. But then how that became a bit of a prison when I'd forget to do it, and then I'd be judging myself and beating myself up, and now it's too late and I haven't done it. And you're like, wow, even the best ideas of character, the best ideas of who we think we are, can become something that we suffer.
I think Sid said, there is no peace to be found in beliefs.
Yeah, I always forget whether there's no peace to be found in beliefs, or all suffering comes from beliefs.
Same thing, isn't it? It's the same thing. Even the beliefs that we hold and we think are the most righteous and kind and whatever, they have the potential to create suffering. Like with Jen with the cards, it's like you won't send it. Didn't cross my mind.
Does a bit more now.
It probably does a bit more now, yeah. But it used to perplex me. But to see this kind of, you send a card when somebody's been kind. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a really good thing, until the individual keeps forgetting to send the card, and they start to suffer that belief. Shit, what are they going to think? What am I doing? And even the most kind-hearted beliefs have the ability to create suffering, because it's ego. Because it's ego, and suffering only exists in ego. It's the only place anger, judgment, hatred, intolerance, wishing harm upon others, greed. We know what all the not so useful traits of humanity are. They only exist in ego, in belief. They only exist because of misunderstanding. It's like Jen and I went to a soup kitchen in South Africa. Probably heard me say this before, but we came out of this soup kitchen and our friend was there, and she burst into tears. There was 300 homeless people in this one room. And she burst into tears and she said, the problem's too big. The problem that South Africa faces is too big. How are we going to deal with all these homeless people? She said, look, we're not even scratching the surface of it. This was just in Cape Town. And Jen and I stopped her and said, oh, hang on. No, the problem that South Africa faces is not big. We said, yes, it's big if you take into account, you think you have to find equal housing, equal opportunity, equal work opportunity, sort out the land issue, whatever. Yeah, it looks massive. But then we said to her, but the only reason why South Africa is as it is because people believe what they believe about one another. South Africa is only as it is because of the way people think about one another. When people's thoughts change, South Africa will change. And it will be effortless. That's how we change the world. We change the inside. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Jesus spoke to this point. It's all about the realization of God within, the Creator. There is only one God. Every single one of those religions speaks about that. There is only one God, and it is all things omnipresent. Of course it is. Universe, uni, singular, uni, one. We even have it in our science. This one force creates all things. We are all that same force. How do you find it? You realize it's true. Where do you realize? You realize within. You just wake up to who and what you are. It's elusive to the intellect. The intellect can't see it because the intellect only deals with finite. It only deals with potential, as opposed to the infinite potential. So the intellect will never find it. That's why you can't think your way to it. It just happens when you just wake up and you suddenly realize something new. Realize, to draw from within the being to make real as an experience, to create reality, create reality. A new reality is born with insight. A new experience is brought into the earthly plane from the infinite. Every single one of us is this. This is why we're all perfect. Every single one of us is perfect, disguising ourselves as imperfect. The imperfection only exists as a thought, as a belief, as a judgment. The mental illness, the hatred, the intolerance, the suffering. Only exists as a judgment. Only exists because of a judgment, a thought. That's why Sid's message was so simple. The simplicity. As we've probably made this section really complicated, but the simplicity, it's all thought. The simplicity is it's all thought. Walk down the street and look at people. See them in their own world, looking in different shops. And you'll see people looking 5 meters ahead of them, not even in the street, they're miles away, thinking about other things miles away. And you'll find people present in the street, and you'll find people busking, you'll find people dropping litter, you'll find somebody picking litter up and put it in the bin. You'll see people smoking, you'll see people drinking, all kinds of things. You see every aspect of humanity. Because we're all different, because we all think different. It's not in what we think, it's in the fact of thought. Because that is the common denominator. We need to move away from what we're thinking, stop focusing on what we're thinking, and become aware of the role thought plays. Everybody's fascinated by their thoughts. We're mesmerized by our experience. We're mesmerized by our thoughts, mesmerized by them, take up so much of our consciousness. You don't find truth there because it's ever changing. It's like trying to find the truth of the wave by looking at the waveform, only to see it disappear, to be replaced by another one. Oh, bloody hell. Oh, it's gone. Oh. We're looking for the ocean. We're becoming aware that all thought, no matter whether it's the suicide thought or the yogurt thought, what flavor yogurt do I want, as we used last time in a retreat? The suicide thought is made of exactly the same stuff as what flavor yogurt do I want. The thought of judgment is made of exactly the same stuff as, wow, it's a beautiful sunny day outside. Thought is thought. It's all the same thing, just in a different disguise. Yeah. Oh,
Lunchtime.
1 o'clock. Look at that.
So after lunch, we'll come back at 2:30 UK time. And we'd love to hear from people because everyone sat and listened a lot.
So we've got an hour and a half now.
Yeah. And if people don't want to unmute themselves and ask the question, they can either put it in the chat privately to us or email it and we'll read out the question and address it. But if you do want to speak, then please speak up. Thank you, everyone.
See you in a bit.